In the name of God, holy and undivided Trinity. Amen. Amen. So did any of you in the silence hear your name called? No? No. It might have happened. You heard the first reading where Samuel is lying down in the temple and he hears his name called and he goes running to Eli because he's sure Eli's calling him. It's that sort of audible. It's so impressive. It impacts him in that way. So he jumps up, said, "You called me." He says, "I didn't call you. Go lie down." And it happens 3 times before Eli catches on and he says, "Oh, I know what's going on. That's God's voice you're hearing. Go down, go again, and then say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" And then Samuel hears the Lord. And so there's, caught up in this story, together with the gospel, is the attunement that you and I are invited to have, some sort of inner sense or inner knowing or inner hearing that allows us to be guided and directed in our lives, to be informed. That there's information that comes to us not just from what we hear with our ears, but what we hear in our hearts. That there's some attunement that can come through our life, through our development as human beings, that allows us to be hearing with more than our senses, to be knowing with more than what we can physically sense and know. Sort of a strange idea, isn't it? But maybe you've had some taste of it. I had a taste of it. I was on the Appalachian Trail, which in itself is sort of a can be a very transformative, magical experience. Isn't necessarily. It can also be a lot of just working through the day. But one day, I was in North Carolina, in the Smoky Mountains, and I went to a place where there was an overlook, a view, and it was noted in my trail book. So I left the main trail to take this little spur trail, and I climbed up into fog. It was impacted view. There was nothing to see but fog. And I stood on this stone in the middle of a cloud. And something inside me said, "Wait." And as I waited there, people came and they left. They'd come and look around, and they'd say, "Nothing to see here," and they'd go away. And I didn't get discouraged because something in me just said, "Wait." And I knew I needed to stay. And it wasn't hard to stay. It was cool and it was comfortable, but it was a cloud. And it seemed unchanging. And I just waited. And I don't know how long it was, 20 minutes, an hour. But then suddenly I began to see that there was a change in the cloud. The cloud began to shift. And that's not an easy thing to discern, at least I had never seen it before, where there was sort of like layers. And then it began to move. And then it began to lift as I stood there. And this brilliant view opened. And I saw down into the valley and then beyond. And it was lit and colorful. It was so tremendous. And no one else was there to see it because everyone else had come and walked away. Or had decided not to come because it was such a cloudy day. But something in me said, "Wait." And that in and of itself, that knowing internally, that defied my intelligence, it defied all my senses, and yet I knew something that my senses could not, in and of themselves, discern. And it was right. And of course, no one else was hooked to that experience. I wasn't telling anyone else, now wait and stay, and having to sort of challenge their disbelief. It was just my own disbelief. I just stood there and I knew within myself this was what I needed to do. And it might be foolish, but it ended up being awesome. Awesome. So that I'm remembering it now with clarity that it offered me then. So in our lives, the writer to Corinthians, Paul, says we carry this treasure in earthen vessels. In and through our lives, there is the development of our earthiness. There's the development that comes in terms of how what we come to know and to understand historically, and through our upbringing, and through the development of our physicality, and all that we can come in touch with, which is all really valuable, in fact, essential and important, 95% of the time. It's what we live with. It's how we guide ourselves through our lives. And yet what's being pointed to here in the Gospel and in the Old Testament lesson is that in spite of all of what we come to know about what's good and right and how things are meant to be, that there is this inner knowing that sometimes is the thing we really need to listen to. Jesus and his disciples listened to that, and it went against what they understood to be right and good and proper 95% of the time. But in that instance, plucking at the grains on the Sabbath was what they needed to do. And so they did it. Have you ever been out hiking and come across something along the trail that was good to pluck and eat? Oh my gosh. I came across blueberries once, hiking on the trail. I don't know whose they were, but I plucked them and I ate them. And there might have been a law against it, but in that moment, it was what was offered. It was what was present. It was so good. So we can't do that 95% of the time. You know, we can't just sort of go and do what we feel is what we want to do. But there's something about knowing in yourself when it really is time to step outside of what your senses are telling you is the right and good thing, what your conditioning has told you is the right and good thing. There's something about just being awake to what really is being called for in a moment. And it might not be the polite thing, it might not be the thing you've been told is proper, but you know in yourself it's what needs to be done. And having experiences on your own that tune you into that for yourself can help you to feel confident in a situation where you're with someone else that you really need to step outside of your normal relationship with them, your normal way of behaving in those moments that don't come so often, but it's so important when they do that you and I can step outside of what we're accustomed to doing and speak the truth. Speak what needs to be spoken. Do what needs to be done. Even though it isn't our accustomed thing, it isn't the appropriate thing, it isn't the thing that we've been told is what people do or what we do, it isn't the person that our spouse thinks us to be. I tell Jane that my secret side is a panther, and she says, "No, that's not you." I know you. There's no panther there. Well, there is, Jane. But it's only there maybe 5% of the time. So it's getting to know yourself in your fullness. Knowing that all of what society tells you is right and good and proper, all of what circumstances tell you are the limits of what your experience can be, well, maybe yes, but maybe no. And you need to touch into yourself and see and know is this one of those moments when everything I've been brought up to believe, everything that circumstances are telling me is the limit of what can happen, of what I should do, maybe that's not the whole truth. Maybe in this moment, something different is going to happen, something different needs to be done, and I need to step out of my usual and accustomed self to allow that to be. So that was what was happening for Eli and Samuel. That's what was happening for Jesus and the disciples. And it took a certain fierceness and a certain gentleness, both, to allow that to emerge. So offer yourself that opportunity, maybe 5%, 1% of the time, to just check in and see maybe this is a new thing that's being called for from me.